Very generous introduction, a very warm reception. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. What a great privilege it is to be here with you. How many of you are excited? What a great election season we had in 2014. I want to thank each and every one of you for your incredible hard work. Thanks to your hard work, you re-elected Terry and Kim. They're going to do a great job for you leading our state. I want to congratulate your federal delegation, starting with Jody, but also Dave is going to do a tremendous job in Washington, D.C., already hitting the ground running, along with Rod, your other members of your federal delegations, being from the state of Louisiana. I've met several folks here today who came down to my state to help. I just want to thank you. I am thrilled we've got 31 Republican governors. I am thrilled we've got a historic majority in the House. I'm thrilled that Harry Reid is no longer majority leader. I'm really thrilled we can say former senator in front of Mary Landrieu's name from the great Senate. It is great to be back here in Iowa with you. It's great to be here at the Polk County Christmas celebration. Thank you for having me back. You know, I thought long and hard about what we can talk about tonight. I'm certainly excited about the opportunity we have in D.C. I think the American people have given us an opportunity to lead, and it's time for us to lead boldly, based on principle, with conservative solutions. To me, this election was about one simple message. There's the American people saying, we don't want a top-down government approach to running our lives. There's been a lot of controversy about Professor Gruber. He was the MIT professor that went around calling the American people stupid. He was the one that told us they had to lie to us. They couldn't be transparent with us to pass Obamacare. Now, many people have said this was simply a verbal gap. This wasn't a verbal gap. This is what the left thinks. Well, let's remember, the left thinks we're not smart enough to buy our own health insurance. They think we're not smart enough to have our Second Amendment gun rights. They think we're not smart enough to have our First Amendment religious liberty rights. They think we're not smart enough, if you live in New York City, to buy a big gulp on your own. In short, they don't think we're smart enough to live our own lives. This election was about the American people saying to President Obama, saying to the Democratic Party, we've had enough of the government telling us how to live our lives. Now, there's a lot this president has done that worries me, that is dangerous for our country. $18 trillion in debt our children and grandchildren will have to pay back. Obamacare, where they're putting bureaucrats between doctors and their patients, making health care more expensive, more bureaucratic. An EPA that's trying to smother our economy. A foreign policy where our enemies don't fear us, our friends don't trust us, where this president refuses to stand with Israel unequivocally in their battle against terrorists, against Hamas. You've got so many things that worry me coming out of Washington, D.C. You've got a president who tramples on our rights. He's got the IRS going after conservative groups. Scandal after scandal. The Department of Justice spying on AP reporters. Scandal after scandal. There's so many things that worry me about this president and his administration. But the reality is, with a Republican Senate, with a Republican House, and hopefully a Republican president, we can begin to turn back some of the worst of his policies and his abuses. The thing that worries me the most is when you hear this president talk and you see his policies, he is working so hard to redefine the American dream. Now, what do I mean by that? This president's always dividing. He's always dividing us by class, by geography, by gender, by age. He did in his campaigns. He's been doing it as president. And as he talks to us, he tries to convince us the American dream is about government dependence, government growth, government spending, government borrowing. When you look at his policies, it's all about showing us that it's about redistribution. When you hear him talk, it's about equality of outcomes, not equality of opportunity. He even teaches us to be envious, to look down on those that have been successful. When you add up the cumulative effect of his rhetoric and his policies and his speeches, it's clear this president wants to redefine the American dream to be something very different from what your parents taught me and taught you. What our parents taught us that was really the American dream. This president wants to make us more and more like Europe. He wants to embrace 2% growth as a real recovery. Now, the American dream to me is an America where the circumstances of your birth don't determine your outcomes as an adult. It's an America where you don't have to be born in the right zip code with wealthy parents to do great things in this amazing country. It's an America where our best days are always ahead of us, not behind us. It's an America where every generation leaves more opportunities for our children than those opportunities we inherited from our parents. So this election was really not just about Obamacare and amnesty and the EPA and taxes and foreign policy and energy. It was certainly about all those things. But it was also about what kind of American dream do we leave for the next generation. I want to talk to you tonight about what we have to do to restore that American dream. For me, I'll start and tell you why it's so personally important to me. Like many in this room, my parents, my family, my brother and I, we have lived the American dream. And the reason I'm so passionate about this is I want my 3 young children to be able to live the American dream. My dad's 1 of 9. Grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. Was the only one to get past the 5th grade. I know because we heard these stories every single day. You try to ask a dad like that for an allowance. We want to charge you room and board instead. Well, we do. So I bet you every one of you's got somebody like that in your family. Somebody that was the first to go to school. The first to go start a business. The first to get a job so that you could have a better quality of life. Here's what's amazing about my parents' story to me. Over 40 years ago, my parents came halfway across the world. They came to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I apologize, Mr. Chairman, they didn't go to Drake University. They came so my mom could go to LSU. But I want you to think about something, and this amazes my kids. There was no internet back then. You couldn't Google Louisiana and find out about the people and the food and the music and the culture. My parents had never been on a plane before. It was very expensive to make long-distance phone calls. They actually never even met somebody who had visited Louisiana and could come back and tell them what it was like. My mom was pregnant with me. And they came halfway across the world. They left behind their parents, they left behind their siblings, they left behind their family and their friends. They come to a city, to come to a state where they knew nobody. They had never visited before for one reason. Even without visiting here, in their bones, they knew that America was a special place. They knew they could come here and pursue the American dream, and there were 2 things they knew they would find here. They knew they would find freedom and opportunity. And what was amazing, they get to this country, my mom starts going to classes, my dad doesn't know anybody, they're in married student housing, they're spending their last dollars. He didn't come for a government handout, he came to get a job. Didn't know anybody, didn't know any better, didn't know what you were supposed to do, so literally opened up the yellow pages to start calling company after company looking for work. Now, I don't know how many people hung up on my dad. I don't know how many people laughed in his face. I don't know how many weeks, how many hours he was on that phone. But he knew he had to work if he was going to feed his pregnant wife and provide one day for his unborn son. So he kept calling. Finally, he wears down a guy from a railroad company. The guy hasn't even met my dad, offers him a job Monday morning. Says, you can start. He was so taken by his enthusiasm and his desire to work. And I love what my dad tells his new boss. Hasn't even started work yet. Tells his new boss, that's great. Says, now look, I don't have a car, I don't have a driver's license. You're going to have to pick me up on the way to work Monday morning. I mean, who tells that? Who says that to your new boss? The guy was so taken by his enthusiasm, he did exactly that. Came and picked him up on the way to work. 6 months later, I was born at Women's Hospital. It's a great hospital in Baton Rouge. 2 of our kids, we've got 3 children, a 12-year-old girl, 10 and 8-year-old boys. Our oldest and our second child, our daughter and our first boy, were both born at Women's Hospital. They do a great job. Now, our youngest son, he was the one that was kind of famously born at home. I don't recommend that, by the way. First child, 36 hours of labor. Second child, 24 hours of labor. Third child, 30 minutes of labor. But this wasn't planned. We weren't trying to save money or anything. This child just was in a rush. I'll just tell you, I know we're eating dinner, so I'll spare you the details. I'll tell you just 2 things I learned from that experience. So it was just the 2 of us on the floor in the bathroom in our home in Kent. No doctors, no nurses. It was just the 2 of us there. At one point, a policeman did show up, my father-in-law, who came to watch the other 2 kids when we thought we were going to make it to the hospital. These brave men, they knocked on the door, they heard my wife scream. The policeman turned to my father-in-law and said, I'm not going there. Father-in-law looked at him and said, if you're not going, I'm not going. They went back. So as the 2 of us, there were 2 things I learned from that experience. The first is that every man in this room should go home. You need to thank your wives, your sisters, your mothers. I don't care how tough we guys think we are. There's a reason God Almighty, in His infinite wisdom, allows women, not men, to have babies. The dumbest thing I ever heard was about a week later, I was in church, a guy came to me, he heard about this in the papers, and he said, Bobby, the exact same thing happened to me. What do you mean the same thing happened to you? How did it happen to you? He said, well, I had me a kidney stone. It's the exact same thing. I said, unless it was a 9-pound kidney stone, it was not the same thing. And I would not go home and tell my wife that, by the way. But here's the second thing I learned. And I've been blessed to be married to my beautiful wife now over 17 years. We're 18th year of marriage now. Met in high school, didn't start dating then only because she turned me down. But we've been married now almost a little over 17 years. We're in our 18th year. I've lied to her only once. And it was that morning. It was about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And this is why. Our baby boy was being born. She was in all this pain, and she asked me. And by the way, everybody comes up and congratulates me. All I did was hatch the baby. I didn't do the hard work. And so she's asked me, well, what does he look like? What does he look like? Well, I'm here to tell you, it's only on TV and the movies those babies come out pink and beautiful. You know, in a hospital, they're like, there's a reason the nurses clean off those babies before they let you hold the baby for the first time. And so she can't see anything. She's in extreme pain, and she's desperate to know what her newborn son looks like. She goes, what does he look like? Now, if I was being honest, I would have said, he doesn't look like he's done. Let's put him back in for a little while longer. My second thought, which wasn't a lot more helpful, was, well, sweetheart, it looks a lot like your side of the family. I like being married, so I didn't say any of that to her. I said, he's a beautiful baby boy, 10 fingers, 10 toes. And I will tell you this. It was a painful experience for my wife. It's not how she planned to give birth. It's not on the bathroom floor in her gown and you know, with nobody there to help us. But I will say this. And this is what I heard y'all. When I handed her our newborn son, Slade, who's now 8 years old, to hold for the first time, the amazing thing was she forgot about her pain, she forgot about her discomfort, she forgot about all of that. When she held our son for the first time, that love between mom and child, I fell in love with my wife all over again. Just to be, and I've been in the room when our first 2 kids were born. It wasn't my first time. But just that miracle was such an amazing, amazing experience. Now, I tell you that because when we went to Women's Hospital with our other 2 kids, we had great insurance. And it took hours to fill out the paperwork. When I was born so many years ago, I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. Now, there's no Obamacare or anything. All that meant was my parents' insurance didn't cover me. But I loved what my dad did. There was a free hospital down the road, a charity hospital you could have gone. But instead, my parents went to Women's Hospital. And my dad went to the doctor after I was born. He said, look, our insurance doesn't cover this birth, but this is what I want to do. He said, I want to send you a check every month until I pay this bill in full. And that's exactly what he did. No government forms, no paperwork, no contract. Just 2 guys standing in a hospital shaking hands. Because that's what he did. You know, that was a simpler time. I don't know how that would work today. I asked my dad that recently. I said, how do you pay for a baby on layaway? I mean, if you skip a payment, can they bring the baby back? And he said, well, if you were such a bad kid, we would have skipped a payment. If that was an option. But no, you're paid for. Don't worry. Nobody's coming to get you. The reason I tell you that is my parents, they've lived the American dream. And my dad, you know, it's amazing as you get older. Mark Twain said the older we get, the smarter our parents become. I don't know about you, my dad used to say things when I was a child that drove me crazy. My dad used to say things like, if all your friends jumped off the bridge, would you jump off the bridge? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm becoming more and more like my dad. I hear his voice coming out of my mouth involuntarily. And even though I hated that saying as a child, and I swore I would never say it, I say it to my children all the time. My dad had another saying. He'd say, now, as long as you live in my house under my roof, this is not a democracy, this is a dictatorship. Hated when he said that, say it to my kids. But another thing he would always say, my brother and me, is he'd say, sons, I'm not leaving you a famous last name. I'm not leaving you an inheritance, but I will make sure you get a great education. So if you get a great education, if you work hard, there's no limit on what you can accomplish in this great country. The other thing he would also tell us, he'd say, boys, every night when you go to bed, before you go to bed, you need to say your prayers. And in your prayers, you need to get on your knees. And you need to give thanks to God Almighty that you are blessed. You are blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world, the United States of America. Now, I'll be honest with you. When I was a child, I didn't fully understand what he was trying to teach us. I mean, of course I was born here. So was everybody else I knew. Everybody in my neighborhood, everybody at school. I didn't really understand what he was trying to teach me. Now that I'm raising my own children, I think I've got a better idea of what he was trying to teach us. And I don't know about you, but I want my children one day to be able to not only say those prayers that we've taught them to do, but to teach their children to say those prayers. And I am here to tell you, I do believe we are blessed to be in the greatest country in the history of the world. I don't think it's inevitably so. I think every generation is called, as our 40th president reminded us, to renew those principles of freedom for ourselves. There's nothing magic in our DNA and our soil. It's not that we've got these great oceans that protect us, and that's wonderful. But that's not what makes America the greatest country in the history of the world. What makes us so blessed in part is our founding fathers understood the point of a limited government was to secure, not create, but to secure our God-given rights. I actually think the biggest threat to the American dream as we stand and sit here today is the growing size, power, intrusiveness of the federal government. Now, there are many things I've done in Louisiana that I'm proud of that we could talk about tonight. We have been, not only have we cut our budget 26%, we've enacted the largest income tax cut in our state's history. We've cut 34% of our state employees' workforce. We've had 8 credit upgrades. We've been consistently ranked the most pro-life state 5 years in a row. We have our own version of the Second Amendment in our Constitution. We've got the fastest growing private sector economy in a generation. Our GDP, our economy has grown twice as fast as the national economy. More people working than ever before at a higher income, reversing over 25 years of out-migration. But here's the thing I want to talk about tonight. We fought hard. We fought hard to provide statewide school choice so the dollars follow the student instead of making the student follow the dollars. We trust parents to make the best decision for their children. Whether it's homeschool, charter schools, public schools, private schools, we trust parents. And I can stand up here all day and tell you about the great things that's done for our children. We've seen not only academic gains, we've saved taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. Over 93% of the parents are happy with choice and the ability to decide what's best for their children. But here's the part of the story I want to share with you. Who could be against improving academic performance? Who could be against happy parents?
President Obama?
Absolutely. Pretty smart guy. Eric Holder actually took us to federal court. By the way, how many of you are happy that Eric Holder will soon be out of a job? He sued us in federal court to stop school choice. Now, the details are important. We ended up winning that case, but what I couldn't understand was how in the world is the federal government so big, so intrusive, so powerful that it thinks it should stop local school districts and states from giving parents that power, that right, that ability to choose for their children their best path for a good education. And it made me wonder, and it reminded me of something that President Clinton famously said. Remember back in the 90s when he said the era of big government was over? Well, never before has somebody been so wrong about something so important. It made me realize, I think, after 6 years of this president, if we could go back in time, I don't think we would actually believe some of the things that we have seen happen in recent history. You know, in 2012, I campaigned all across the country. I came here to Iowa and all around the country, campaigning against President Obama's re-election of the second term. And I went around the country. I came to Iowa and I said this. I said, he has been the worst president since Jimmy Carter was in the White House. Now, after the re-election, I actually went to CPAC in Washington, D.C. From a national audience, I actually apologized to the president. Because I'll be honest, I do think I was disrespectful. I apologize to Jimmy Carter for insulting him. I I mean, at least Jimmy Carter believed in American exceptionalism. He was incompetent, but at least he believed in American exceptionalism. We today have a president who doesn't even believe in American exceptionalism. You look at some of the things we have seen in the last 6 years. Leading from behind means not leading at all. Who amongst us would have believed, if we'd gone back 6 years ago, who would have believed they would have created a new entitlement program when we can't afford the one we've got today? Would you have believed they would have done that? No. If I'd gone back in time and said, would you really believe they'd create $18 trillion of debt in our name? Would we believe that? No. If I'd gone back in time and said they wouldn't even build the Keystone Pipeline when the Canadians simply want to sell us their oil so we can refine it and sell it or use it, would we have believed that? No. If I'd gone back in time and said, would you really believe our ambassador in Libya would be killed and they'd blame it on a YouTube video? Would we believe that? No. If I'd gone back in time and predicted the IRS would be going after conservative groups, the DOJ would be spying on AP reporters, would we have believed that? No. If I'd gone back in time and said Secretary Clinton would be so exasperated at having to answer questions to the Senate committee that in response to the death of the ambassador, she'd say, what difference does it make? Would we believe that? No. On example after example, I believe in the last 6 years, we have seen abuses and growth of our federal government to extents we couldn't even imagine 6 years ago. If I would have asked you, do you really believe we'd have a president who would just ignore the Constitution, ignore federal law, whether it was ignoring parts of Obamacare or trying to issue amnesty through an executive order, would we have believed that? No. And two examples that stand out to me in terms of the growth, the size, the power, the intrusiveness of the federal government into our lives as a threat to the American dream. The first, many of you may have seen that in the state of Louisiana, we've actually joined a federal lawsuit. We've actually filed a federal lawsuit, I should say. We've taken Arnie Duncan to court. And we have sued the Department of Education and President Obama, saying they are violating both the 10th Amendment to the Constitution as well as federal law by trying to force Common Core into the classrooms of Iowa and Louisiana. Common Core is just the latest example of this federal. We have never allowed the federal government to make curricula decisions for our local classrooms. And I would tell you both to prevent this power being ceded to the federal government, we need to stand against this, but also as a parent. Anybody that's undecided about Common Core, I would encourage you to actually look at the text yourself. Look at the map. I call this the new map. My little boy, my youngest, one that was born at home, is now in the 3rd grade. When he was in the 2nd grade, he brought home a math test from school. He'd gotten all the answers right in terms of getting the numbers right. It was a simple test. It was like 18 plus 4. It was just 2nd grade math. But then half the test said, now you've got to use Common Core methods to show why your answer is right. So instead of adding the numbers up in a column and just carrying over your digits the way that we were all taught, you had to do everything in terms of diagrams, and instead of 18 plus 4 being 22, 18 becomes 20 minus 2. Instead of just 18 writing it down, you now have to draw a series of symbols for the 10s and the 1s, and it becomes a 6-step process. And so basically half the test is explain why your answers are right. Now my little boy was 7 at the time, he has the attention span of a gnat. I mean, I love him, but he's all boy. That's just how he is. We were talking earlier about in church, he just can't sit still. That's just how he is. And he'd gotten all the answers right, but the second half of the test, the teacher said, show why your answers are right. My little boy wrote in every blank, just because it is. Teacher sent it home to my wife. My wife gave it to me. She said, you need to talk to your son. I said, Slade, come see me. He explained to me. He goes, but Daddy, it's true. I said, all right, good talk. Well, outside the plane. I said, I couldn't get mad. How can you get mad at the boy for telling the truth? So if you're undecided, I would encourage you, look at the reading list associated with Common Core, and don't accept the nonsense coming from the other side. You can be for standards. You can be for rigor without being for a federal takeover of our curriculum. This is a dangerous, dangerous precedent. The second example, the final example of federal overreach that worries me greatly. I don't know about you, but I'm very concerned about the assault on religious liberty in our country. How many of you are happy in the Green family case and the Hobby Lobby case that the Supreme Court ruled the Green family doesn't have to spend over $1 million a day in fines simply because they don't want to spend their own money buying abortifacients for their employees? How many of you are happy the Supreme Court made that ruling? My only question is this. 5-4 ruling for religious liberty, why wasn't that a 9-0 ruling for our First Amendment rights in the Constitution? Make no mistake about it, there's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of association rights without our religious liberty rights. And make no mistake about it, when liberal politicians, when President Obama and Secretary Clinton talk about freedom of religious expression, that's not religious liberty. What they mean by that is you have the right for an hour on Sunday, an hour on Wednesday to do what you want. Religious liberty means being able to live your life according to your sincerely held religious beliefs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, I said this earlier that I'm not in favor of frivolous lawsuits. We've done tort reform in Louisiana. But there is one lawsuit I would recommend. We like to say that President Obama is this really smart constitutional lawyer. Well, if I were him, I would sue Harvard Law School. If I were him, I'd ask for my tuition money back. So I don't know what he learned in 3 years of studying the law. I knew he didn't like our Second Amendment rights. I thought at least he respected our First Amendment rights. You know, the reality is this. The United States of America did not create religious liberty. Religious liberty created the United States of America. It is a reason. You may have noticed several months ago, Phil Robertson of the Duck Dynasty family got into some trouble with the media. And one of the first people to defend him was the governor of Louisiana. You may have thought I defended him simply because the Robertsons are in Louisiana, and that's not why. You may have thought I defended them because they're close personal family friends, and they are, but that's not why. You may have thought I defended them simply because my boys are big fans of the show. And by the way, it is nice to be able to watch a TV show as a family where you're not worried about the language and the images. You can actually share it as a family once again. And it is true, I got my name from the Brady Bunch. And by the way, when I was growing up, the Brady Bunch came right before Gilligan's Island. So it could have been a lot worse. I don't think the people of Louisiana would have elected Gilligan the governor of Louisiana. I'm glad I chose Bobby Brady as my role model. But those aren't the reasons I defended the Robertsons or Phil's right to speak out. And regardless of whether you agree with what he said or how he said it, the reason I spoke up is this. I'm tired of the left. I'm tired of the left telling us that they're for tolerance and pluralism and respect others' points of view, because the reality is this. On this issue, they are some of the biggest hypocrites. The left is tolerant of anybody except for those that have the temerity to actually disagree with them. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to take it anymore. It's time for us to stand up for ourselves. You know, it was a little disconcerting. Several months ago at the National Prayer Breakfast, the President spoke eloquently about the plight of Christians being persecuted around the world. And you know, he was exactly right. There are Christians being crucified and killed for their beliefs around the world. There's not a shooting war against religious liberty here at home. And thank God for that. We shouldn't conflate the two. There are Christians being killed, persecuted for their faith in countries all over this world. Yet it was still odd to hear the President speak so eloquently about the plight of Christians being persecuted while ignoring his own policies here at home that threaten our religious liberty rights. Yet again, there's a Grand Canyon-sized gap between what this President says and what he does. If you missed the speech, I can summarize it for you. Basically, the President said he was worried about religious liberty. Therefore, if you like your religion, you can keep your religion. You know, before I close, I want to say this. I thought long and hard about our current occupant in the White House. And I've wondered, is he the most liberal president we have seen in our lifetimes? Most ideologically extreme president who doesn't even believe in American exceptionalism, who embraces multilateralism instead of American leadership, who really believes in government redistribution as the American dream? Or is he the most incompetent president we have seen in our lifetimes? A man who had never run anything before he was elected president of the United States, who has mishandled foreign policy, who has mishandled domestic policy, who has mishandled the tremendous responsibilities of his job. And I've struggled between ideological extremism and incompetence. And the only answer that has satisfied me is to quote Secretary Clinton, "What difference does it make?" But before I get to my final story, I want to make sure that I emphasize I still believe in my bones my parents were right. Our best days are ahead of us. We are blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. And I do think my children's children, my grandchildren will one day be able to say the same prayer my parents, my dad taught me and my brother to say at our dead. To give thanks to God Almighty, we were blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world. But I also know it's not inevitable. And I know generations before us have made great sacrifices, spilling their blood and sacrificing great treasure to secure our rights, to secure our freedoms, to secure our liberties. I think every generation is called to make that choice for themselves, and this is our moment of choosing. You've done a great thing here in Iowa with your elections. We've made great progress in Louisiana. But now is our time to govern. We are not called to be the party of no. We're not simply called to be the anti-Obama party. We're also not called to be the second liberal party in this country. We're called to be a principled conservative party. Let's challenge the president to do the right thing. Hillary Clinton started with Hillary Care in the early 90s. It took them nearly 16 years to take over our healthcare system. We may not win every single battle, but we've got to start the fight today. And freedom is worth fighting for. And what gives me great hope are the great people of Iowa, of Louisiana, and other states. Because I do sense there's a rebellion brewing out there. I sense the people are fed up with D.C. and they want a hostile takeover of our nation's capital. And I do have a word of warning for our leaders in D.C. not to listen to the experts, the punks that tell them you can't repeal Obama, tell them you can't balance the budget, that tell them you can't be energy independent, you can't actually cut federal spending, you can't stand with Israel. Don't listen to the experts, listen to the American people. Because as frustrated as we are with President Obama and the left and the Democratic Party, they will quickly become frustrated with us if we don't lead. We've been given a great opportunity to get our country back on the right path. And we need to do it not for us, but for our children and grandchildren. So they can say that same prayer and give thanks to God Almighty. They are blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world. I'm going to close with a final story in honor of the season. Tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, and we're all, I know, getting ready to celebrate a great Christmas celebration. I want to share with you the traditions in the Jindal household, and I'll be done. We got that little girl and those two boys, and every family is a little different. Everybody does things differently. In our house, we go to Christmas Eve. We go to services on Christmas Eve. We go to church Christmas Eve. Christmas Day, we wake up, we let the kids wait for their own beds, and they go and open their presents as soon as they want to wake up. And then we have one big meal. It's not lunch, it's not dinner. We just have one big meal where we eat a ton of food. It's Louisiana, so it's good, but it's not particularly healthy. And we are the state that gave you turducken, that gave you fried turkey, and many other. We thought that the Thanksgiving and Christmas meals weren't unhealthy enough. We thought that wasn't enough meat, so we decided to cram a chicken into a duck and a turkey. So we know how to eat in Louisiana. My mom makes one of her most amazing dishes. She makes a sweet potato dish that's got sweet potatoes, it has got brown sugar, it has got nuts, it's got marshmallows. And we serve this as a side dish. This isn't dessert, this is a side dish. She then takes a pecan pie, because that's not sweet enough, puts chocolate chips in it, a chocolate chip pecan pie. So by the time the afternoon comes around, the kids have opened their presents, we have eaten dinner, and we are basically in just a food-induced coma sitting on the couch. And we're surrounded by family and loved ones, and it's been another great Christmas. And my little girl, this happened years ago, she was about 3 or 4 years old. We're sitting at my parents' house, and my little girl comes up to me and says, "Daddy, isn't today Jesus' birthday?" There are moments as a dad when you're so proud that I must have done something right along the way. Even by accident, we did something right. When your kid's just surprised you with something like that. I thought in the middle of her toys and the food, she remembered what the day was really about. I said, "Sweetheart, that's exactly right. Today's Jesus' birthday." But she wasn't done. So she looks around and says, "Well, where's the birthday cake?" I said, "Are you hungry? There's pie in the fridge. Grandma made you another plate. Are you hungry?" And she goes, "No, Daddy, you don't understand." She goes, "For my birthday, I get a chocolate cake. How come Jesus doesn't get a chocolate cake for his birthday?" You see, as parents, we have taught our children there are two things that happen at every birthday. There may be a bouncy castle outside or spacewalk, whatever you call it. There may be rides, but there are always two things. We always teach when you go to a friend's birthday party, you're going to bring a present, And you have to give it to the other child. You can't come home with a present. That's an important lesson. If you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. The second thing we teach our children is you will not leave until the birthday child blows out the candles and there'll be a birthday cake. Nowadays it's cupcakes. That's a popular thing. But there'll be a birthday cake, and then you can come home. But every party she's ever been to that's been a birthday has those two elements. May have other things, but it has those two elements. And so she's arguing with me that it can't be Jesus' birthday until we have the cake. We're not done until we have the cake. The only thing I'm thinking is I'm not getting off this couch. So I'm honestly having an argument. This shows you how smart I am. I'm having an argument with this 4-year-old about how we're not going to go make the cake. My mom comes into the room. She overhears this argument. She listens to this for a little bit. She listens and she goes, "Son, get off this couch and go make her a cake. You're not winning this argument." So we did. We made a cake. We put 3 candles in it. We sang happy birthday to Jesus. She blew out the candles. Every year, we've now since then baked a birthday cake. We moved into the mansion. She was 6 years old. And the governor's mansion in Louisiana, we got trustees. I remember my first Christmas there. The governor's mansion has a very public Christmas celebration. We have a lighting of the trees with our military families. They have church choirs come and sing. We have families come in throughout the mansion. It's a wonderful holiday. And so the trustees do a fantastic job. The staff has been doing this for years. And I told them, well, look, our first Christmas, this was my first year as governor, I said, we're going to have to do a birthday cake. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, has this governor lost his mind? What's wrong with you? Who does a birthday cake? And the reason I want to close with that is I do hope you have a joyous and blessed and safe Christmas. I just want to remind you, there's nothing wrong with holiday shopping, nothing wrong with trees and presents and traffic and getting the perfect meal and having all the guests sit next to each other where they're supposed to sit and making sure that everybody gets along. There's nothing wrong with all those things. And by the way, my family's gotten so big, I suggested to my wife we give out name tags this year. She was not happy about that. But at the end of the day, it really is a birthday celebration. And if you just remember, if all you do on Christmas Day is sing happy birthday to Jesus, that may be the most important thing we can do to remember what Christmas is really about. Merry Christmas, God bless y'all, and congratulations on a great election year in the great state of Iowa.